Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome. If you would like to take your seats and maybe grab a coffee or something, please do. But we'll get started just so we don't fall behind. So I'd like to welcome you to the event today. My name is Famita Gwadri-Sridhar. I'm the founder and CEO of Pulse InfoFrame, and I'm chairing the session. I realize the podium is very tall. You may not be able to see me entirely, so I probably need a little stool going forward. But we're here today because it's really quite an exciting time in the rare disease community. And I thought I'd share this slide with you that my team have put together about, as we think about accelerating rare disease treatments, which is really what we're going to be talking about today, what are the key components that we saw were really important? And you may have your own. So this is just one framework to consider. Time. Everything takes time, but unfortunately for many rare disease patients and their families, time is not always on their side. Access is access to healthcare, access to the people who can help you. But access is such a critical factor because we know that when you don't have access, then time no longer is on your side. We forget about the importance of health literacy. My colleague and I yesterday were talking about the importance of, there's so much information out there, but if you don't understand it, and most of us don't, you go to, Dr. Google and you try to find whatever you can. But at the end of the day, health literacy is very different from being literate. Most of us are educated, but there are many people who, even though they're educated, may not have the health understanding that we need to really distill the information to help us. So how do we actually accelerate if we don't have health literacy? And this also very much speaks to the global nature of rare disease, because literacy levels around the world are very different depending upon where you live, your access to information, and your access to the types of expertise that you need to be able to accelerate some of the creation of new diseases. So let's not forget about the people around the rest of the world who are equally important in this equation. Money. The thing that none of us really like to talk about. It's the reality of what it takes to actually build something and create something. When you look at the cost of bringing a new drug to market, and I know you'll be talking to some people here today who will be presenting around, the economic implications of new therapy, but it's the money to bring it to market, but also some of the new gene therapies are very targeted. And as we continue to evolve in precision medicine, there's a considerable amount of resource, which is money and people that are required. And finally, the importance of science and research. Often what I see, and your experience may or may not be the same, that many people have solutions. They have something that they want to put forward. But a solution that is not scientifically based, I would posit, is not necessarily in the best interest of the community. And by that, I mean, just because we have something that can fix something, if we haven't thought about the implications, the endpoints, the outcomes we're interested in, and if we haven't taken sort of a thoughtful approach, then where does that really leave us? And so, this is not meant to be an answer. This is really meant to be something for us to think about as we're here over the next 2 days to really consider all of these key components and others that you may think about. And so as we look at patients, there are two images here, one of a baby. We know that in the rare diseases, there are well over 7,000 because every day there are new ones being discovered. You think about the pediatric population and the infant population. We want them to grow older and we want them to be able to live a very rich life, but how do we get there? And then we think about some of the rare diseases that hit people when they're older and how do we improve their quality of life? So as we think about the importance of all of these components in accelerating rare disease treatments, also think about the key word here, which is collaboration. We really talk a good game. All of us talk about the importance of collaboration. How many of us actually do it? Let's be honest. And so ask yourself that question. And the question is, how can I be a better collaborator? And how can I actually share my knowledge and information so that collectively we can actually cut through some of these paradigms and silos that exist? And this is not meant to be something that's being critical against any of us. It's really compelling us because sometimes we think we're being collaborative, but often we're not. I often will go to a meeting or conference and meet people and realize that there's so many people doing research in the same field I am, but how come I never knew about them? And there's a great opportunity for us to be able to share information. So ultimately, our goal here is to generate evidence, and evidence generation considers all of these factors, and ultimately the most important, which I would say is collaboration. So on that note, I'd really like to welcome you here today, and I'd like to open this conference. And I'm really excited to see so many people face to face. Even though it's not a completely full room, it's so much better than we've had over the last couple of years. And I'd like to introduce our first moderator today, Josie Godfrey, who is the co-founder and CEO of Realize Advocacy. Welcome, and thank you.
Just getting noise, so I'll just invite the panel to come up and take a seat. So the first thing we'll notice is we do not have David. We've got Carol and Sheila. So who's looking at? So we have 2 mics. Is that edit over? Can you hear me? No? Okay, so who wants to take the mic? Hopefully it will work, but everyone can hear me. So we're going to build on that theme. Oh, that's definitely working. Shouting at everyone. I'll wake you up. So we're going to build on this theme of accelerating development, accelerating orphan treatments for rare diseases, which I'm personally very excited about. We have a fantastic panel of different perspectives. I'm going to just ask them now to introduce themselves just very briefly, and then we'll get straight into some questions, and I hope you'll have some comments and questions too. We'd love to all wake up this morning and be as interactive as we can. I hope you've had some caffeine. Carol, do we start with you? Quick introduction.
Yes, thanks, Josie. And no, I haven't had enough caffeine yet, but there we go. Hello, everybody. I'm Carol Scrafton. First and foremost, I am a patient. I was diagnosed as an adult, aged 39, not as a young child. But I wear many hats. I run an advocacy organisation that welcomes multi-stakeholders. So our doors open to everybody. And now I'm
That's okay. We'll pass it on to Sheila, who I'm sure some of you will know. And I basically stole our next speaker, so we at least know she won't wander off when it's time for the presentation. Sheila, say hello.
Thanks, Josie. Sheila Riccardi, the Rare Disease Advisor at NICE.
Angela.
Yeah, should I just, yeah. Okay, so I'm Angela Columbano, I'm Head of Business Development and Partnership at Geneton. Just 2 words about Geneton. Geneton is a non-for-profit organization working on gene therapy for rare and ultra-rare disease. We're based in France, and we were created by the French Patient Association for Myopathies. So it's quite a unique ecosystem. So our board of directors is mainly parents of children with myopathies. And so we are not ourselves in an association or patient association or an advocacy group, but we are very close, obviously, to the whole patient association environment created by the AFM Teleton.
Thanks, Angela. And last but definitely not least, Ria.
Hello, good morning, everybody. My name's Rhian Kiley. I'm the Commercial Director of Real World Evidence at Open Health. We're an organisation that specialises in communications and evidence and access. And my role really is to provide consultancy to organisations about generation of evidence to demonstrate value. This includes a number of assets in rare disease. So very nice to be here today. And yeah, look forward to a fruitful discussion.
And now we have to pass the mic all the way back. It's going to be a bit like pass the pastor, but with no prizes, I'm afraid. So,
vicariously.
Carol, I thought we'd start with you. This session's about patients and the patient perspective. And unfortunately, David couldn't join, so I'm afraid you are the only we're all patients in a way, aren't we? But the only patient representative purely on the panel. So I'd really like to ask you to help us think about the kinds of impacts that the innovations we're talking about today and others will have on patients.
Well, I think obviously the main one at the moment is remote access, telehealth, all of those kind of things, giving patients more freedom to be monitored from home. I know from my perspective, if I was in that situation, I would rather be at home getting monitored. All the different gadgets, just in general for not even just for clinical trials, but just for monitoring health per se. And for me personally, one of my personal favorites, and I'm going to use an example here, MediSafe. They started off as a very, very, very simple medication reminder app a few years ago. And when you look at them now, they've developed into a platform where caregivers are welcome on there, and that you can have your consultants there, and they've got access to the data that you're plumbing into this platform with respect to the medications you take. You've got access to the different medication information and everything, drug information, access to consultants, even if you want to speak. And it's actually really quite amazing, really, the transformation in just a few short years. And it's not the only one, I'm just using that as an example. And I even saying that really, that in itself is good, that it's not the only one. It shows that there's competitors out there as well, and there's a lot of it. Not just for, local and regional either, they're spreading more international and global, which makes it even better. So access to help and care was happening before the pandemic. The pandemic, in my opinion, has sped that up quite a lot and made it more of an essential necessity. And I suppose that's why it's got the way it is now.
Thanks, Carol. And a really important reminder, I think, that it's not just about pharmaceuticals. It's not just about drug interventions. There are a huge number of innovations, particularly in the digital health space, that can really have a transformative impact on patients and families and how they manage and navigate life with their conditions. So thanks for sharing that, Carol. Angela, I'm going to really make it hard work for you with the mic. Angela, perhaps we could bring you here because you're, Jennifer, very much focused on bringing innovation to treatment, particularly rare disease patients. What more needs to be done to accelerate that innovation, that development?
Yeah, so I think it was nicely put by them in the introduction to today. I like very much the slide that was presented. So Genethon works gene therapy. So this is really precision medicine, and this is the whole mission and vision when Genethon was created to find therapeutic solution. The French association behind us is a very, very active and able to mobilize a strong voice to support research in rare disease, at least in France. However, obviously, so first of all, there is a huge number of rare disease, and 80% of them are ultra rare. And so where the issue we face today is gene therapies with the ups and downs, because there are still some hurdles to be overcome. Gene therapy is proven to be a very powerful way to treat rare disease. And look at what Zolgensma SMA has done to children with SMA. They transformed the life of children that otherwise would have died before 2 years old. However, it's expensive to develop gene therapy. It requires a large economical resources. And so when you have to face ultra rare disease, where there's only a few patients that will benefit for that treatment, it become a real economic question marks, how we're going to solve it. So Genethon is trying to work more and more on ultra rare disease that otherwise probably don't have the kind of economic models that would trigger interest of large pharma, because there just not enough patients to satisfy the business model of large pharma. And that's where we find but something has to change in the system we work. Something has to change in the way we develop drugs. We have to take less time. We have to invest in manufacturing innovation so the drugs don't cost $1 million a dose. Today it's easy that a gene therapy gets up as costly as $1 million per dose to be manufactured. And so that's where we find working closely and having a patient association behind us help us to create the kind of lobbying and the kind of interaction and constructive discussion with regulatory bodies, with politicians as well. So to facilitate a way we can invest in gene therapy for ultra-rare disease, and so innovate in the therapeutic side of rare disease, and in a way that is not a classic pharma, in a different model. We haven't found it yet, we are working on it, but the patients, the voice of the patient is key to mobilize the type of discussion and resources that we need.
Thanks, Angela. Interesting proposition for a room like this in terms of rethinking the model of investment and the model of development and moving away from a classic traditional pharma model. I'm not going to put anyone on the spot in the room, but if anyone's feeling brave and wants to come back to that point now or as we move through this panel, please do, because I think it's a really interesting suggestion, and we've seen some interesting success in different models. Who next? Sheila, why not? For those of you who just joined, we're passing mic between the panels, so I'm trying to make it as hard as possible for them. Make sure everyone stays awake. Sheila, so I think disease is about the same time, I think almost today, in the UK. So we've worked together for quite a while now. I won't say how long, so it'll make us feel old. But I know that you've done an awful lot of work to try and accelerate the development of new innovations, pharmaceutical and non-pharmaceutical, and very much put the patients at the heart of that, or tried to. So I wondered if you wanted to build on what Angela said on that point about the importance of having the patient as a partner in that journey.
Absolutely. I mean, it can't be understated how important it is for patients to be at the heart of the conversation for a number of reasons. If I put a number of hats on, so if I put my old hat on, where Josie and I used to work together in the commissioning arena, where we were responsible for commissioning services for patients with very rare diseases, knowing what the patient needed, knowing what was required by them, helped us shape services around them, rather than, I hate to say this, excuse me about any clinicians that might be in the room, clinicians deciding what patients needed. It's all right. I'm always provocative, and it's worth putting it out there. So I think what I learned from that process is actually collaborating with patients and clinicians and with us as commissioners enabled us to build services around the needs of the patients. And then putting myself in my nice kind of shoes and all of the technologies that we've evaluated there, what we've really seen is that in the rare disease space, given the challenges associated with evidence generation, understanding the natural history, and really being able to clarify what those therapies are doing for patients, having patients in that conversation helps build the story, build a clearer picture, a much more stronger evidence base. In fact, I've been speaking to companies only over the last few days where I have to say, still surprised that they hadn't thought to speak to the patient groups about the data and evidence that they hold. And it's for me, it's a travesty, because patient groups now are so much more empowered, they are so much more well structured, they really understand the role they play. And I think going back to sort of that first theme, the introduction this morning, collaboration is key, because if we want access, we need to work together. We all have strengths, we all have areas of knowledge, but if we build that knowledge together, the picture is going to be much clearer and much more complete for organizations like the EMA, the FDA, NICE, to be able to make positive decisions. With an incomplete picture, you've got uncertainties, and that's when doubt creeps in and decisions aren't made fast enough.
Thanks, Sheila. And that was a wonderful plug for my session this afternoon on patients in HTA, and I didn't even pay you to do that, so thank you. But seriously, it is a really important topic, and if you are anxious about it and what it means. It's important to talk to people like Sheila and myself and others and not put it off too long. Rhian, you've been sitting very patiently, so thank you for that. The big guess I was going to next, which is Scotland. Thinking about that access element that Sheila helpfully segued into. Thank you. It's like you've done this before. I know that you work with a lot of companies around that. What more needs to be done to improve and accelerate access, and what can people in this room?
Yeah, well, I guess I was just going to come back to the first point really, because working in evidence generation, especially in rare disease, has its challenges, but is a very exciting and ever-changing space to be. And I guess what we need to do is ensure that we have the evidence that payers and commissioners need in order to allow access to those new treatments or innovations, if you like. And really in the evidence space, we've had to be very creative. And I think it goes back to your point about the pandemic and digital health. We've had to be really creative about the way in which we gather data from patients. And so actually, you know, the number of patients using digital health, working with organizations who develop those sorts of platforms, especially in rare disease, is really important in terms of evidence generation, because actually they're very rich sources of data, and actually can really ensure that, you know, we can generate evidence in a very sort of non-invasive way. Like you say, you're at home, you know, perhaps filling in diaries to sort of say how you're feeling. And that kind of evidence is really important in terms of sort of describing, you know, the patient voice that we referred to. And so leveraging those sorts of innovations, if you like, and sort of alongside the NHS sort of digital strategy is really, really important in terms of evidence generation. And I think particularly in rare disease, where we always have the challenge of patient numbers, what it does, it allows those data sources to come together outside of perhaps the sorts of research projects we used to do that were done at a specialist centre, and there was a very, you know, you had to send your consent form in and it all became quite cumbersome. Actually, you know, that sort of decentralisation means that actually we can get more fair representation in the sorts of evidence that we generate, because we've broken down some of the barriers to accessing that data. So I think that's really sort of where we need to be working for and continue really in the next couple of years.
Thanks, Fiona. I can see Carol. Can we pass the mic? I saw you nodding away, Carol. So I'd love to invite you and see how that resonates with you.
It's interesting the way that you say about finding new ways to gather data, because a couple of weeks ago I was at the Wales Genomics Cafe, something that I do attend every now and again when I get the opportunity. And one of the presentations that was there that day was by an organisation with a genomics doctor, and a company called Phenotypica, and they basically got children to express their emotions and their experiences through poetry, like a particular type of poetry, and they would extrapolate that data, and then also through artwork and a variety of different things. And then they would take that and analyze all of that and develop art. But it was all based around those children's, their specific data. And it was very, very interesting. And for me, you know, when you consider the types of people with rare diseases who are non-communicable, for instance, they can't speak for themselves. I mean, for me, it was quite eye-opening, because when you're looking for new ways to be able to gather data, then that's definitely, they've got something really quite unique there. Sorry, I just had to hop in and say that.
To this sort of a story of equity as well that you kind of describe, is actually, yes, we can tell stories and we can gather information, we can talk to patients, we can do lots of surveys, but actually in rare disease we need to ensure that the stories of those patients that can't, you know, fill in 100 questionnaires, not 100, but I would never do that, but, you know, questionnaires to describe their experience and their families for that matter, really. We use things like social listening, we use kind of creative ways in which we can allow people to tell their stories. And yeah, I think it's really interesting that you describe art essentially as a way of telling stories, which I think is something that since in history has always been the way in tapestry.
So I have visions of nice committees looking at, artwork now,
Tapestries
and I can hear what they're
sculpture.
saying. And I don't know, Sheila, what do you think? Is art going to crack it, or do we need to maybe translate the art into something slightly different?
I mean, I'm going to talk a little bit about this in my presentation later on, but at the end of the day, evidence generation still needs to be undertaken in a structured way. So it's presented in a way that committees like NICE committees and other committees can make appropriate, consistent, transparent decisions. So that's really important. But the thing I really wanted to pick up, Rhiannon, in your kind of feedback was one of the things I've learned. So the other part of my role is I'm responsible for the COVID response at NICE. So we've been working quite diligently about looking at all the therapies that are being accelerated through the pathway for COVID, obviously for obvious reasons. But as you probably all know, there is some real challenges in trying to access different diverse groups into trials and the effect of that on those patients and families. And I think, and I'm hoping that this kind of innovative arena of digital apps and health and web-based systems will hopefully open up that active engagement from communities that we often really are challenged to engage with, particularly in rare diseases, because there are specific diseases that have particular groups of people that might be affected, but of course we sometimes struggle to engage with them. So I would really put a call out there for all of us in that kind of spirit of collaboration to think about how are we going to engage those diverse communities within these trials so they are representative of the patients that we're trying to support.
Thanks, Sheila. Really, really important point, and starts to hint at some of the barriers, some of the challenges to putting patients at the heart of research and the heart of access. It's sometimes how do you engage with those communities, particularly in rare disease communities, and the rarer, the harder quite often. I'm looking around the audience and I do see a couple of familiar faces. So I'm wondering if anyone's awake enough to want to join in the discussion or ask any questions. If there are patient representatives in the room, maybe does this resonate? Are you finding these same barriers, or are there others that are much more pressing for you in terms of being engaged in this process? And likewise for companies, what's are you doing this already? And you're just going, yeah, whatever. We're brilliant at patient engagement. Or other. Oh, we have a hand. Excellent, brave soul. There's a mic coming your way.
A loud voice, but it's not necessary, I guess. So I'm with a clinical research organisation. I'm doing a presentation later on this morning, and I don't want to go through all my best lines, but are we experts about engaging with patient groups? Do we get it right all the time? No, we absolutely don't. One thing that particularly resonated, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, is the business of decentralized trials. It's a popular word, it's a buzzword, but it's actually in practical terms, from the point of view of the regulatory authorities and the way they view clinical trials, becoming a lot more achievable than it was previously. And part of that, I think, is that there's been a loosening up of the way that the regulatory authorities view evidence, view clinical trials, view consent, view monitoring post-COVID. And I'll say one or two words about that later, but I think we should all be open-minded about what is and what is not a clinical trial, and what is and what is not evidence, and the smartest way to generate that evidence. And that's all from me for now.
Thank you. Oh, I can see another. Oh, hands everywhere. This is exciting. Should we go to the lady in the red jumper first, and then back up the front, just to make life easier? See, I'm being kind to him with the mic.
Hi, I'm Zizi Matababy. I'm Senior Vice President, Global Strategy with Ergomed, a clinical research organization based in the UK and in the US. So we work a lot with rare diseases. I guess one of my questions is, when you talk about rare diseases and also you talk about access for diverse populations, it's already a challenge in regular clinical trials, right, to get diverse populations. I think in the US, for example, probably 5% of our trials are diverse. And then you talk about rare diseases where maybe very localized that affect really specific minority populations. I'm just curious to hear from the panel what some of your thoughts are. I think this gentleman here alluded to decentralized trials, and I know there's a lot of technology and then a lot of community effort that's actually required to reach these types of communities, especially the very rare ones. But I'm curious to hear from the panel some of your thoughts on what you're doing to reach underserved populations in the rare disease space.
Sheila, you have the mic, so do you want to try and tackle it first?
You certainly put me on the spot there.
It's a good question.
It's a
good
really,
question.
really good question. And I think if I can reflect on my experience in the COVID arena as a kind of platform, one of the things that the NHS and the NIHR, who's the research body here in the UK, have been doing is trying to, through the identification of patients with a positive diagnosis of COVID, reaching out to them through their GP practices to engage in trials, undertaking quite direct communications with them. I think the challenges come with trying to provide appropriate education and guidance to those minority and diverse populations about the benefits of engaging in these activities and what it will bring to them. And I think we've got to get better at being able to speak in the right language and the right terminology so that it doesn't feel alien, it doesn't feel like we're trying to do things to them. It's about how they can engage. And I think in principle for me, in rare diseases, there's a real kind of solidarity that you don't see in the more prevalent conditions. And somehow we've got to mobilize that so that we can work together to think about that greater good, not just for the individual patient, but actually what can I do as an individual, as a person who works for an organization and as a patient to mobilize that and to be much more vocal about how those communities should engage and what kind of responsibilities they hold for that. So, and I think that's, for me, is one of the beauties about working in rare diseases. That collaboration, that solidarity is much more profound and much more magnified than it is in other communities. So let's think about how we mobilize that.
Thanks, Sheila. Angela, I don't know if you wanted to come in about the sort of Genethon and how you approach it and try and reach out to those patients and engage with them.
Yeah, so it makes me think, I think I see it from a different side. So, and again, I go back to ultra rare disease. Don't forget 80% of rare disease are ultra rare. And so when you have a disease where you have 40, 50 patients in total between US and Europe, then I cannot obviously, the whole clinical development is to be adapted to that. And it has to be, especially if there is no therapeutic solution available, there's no alternative, and the life of the patients is threatened. So if you don't treat, you're going to lose that patients. Then we have to find a very flexible approach, and that's what we're looking for. So maybe you have to just prove safety and some efficacy in few patients. And maybe I'm stepping beyond my, because I'm a business development person, so I'm probably going to be challenged by regulatory and experts. But there has to be a way to prove that you can be to few patients, 2-3 patients safe, there's some efficacy, and then it has to be put available in a kind of a conditional type of approval that was so successful for COVID. And then you have to get probably the family of the patients deciding, yes, there's nothing else, and I want to treat my child. And so that kind of put the time that you get those hopefully successful therapeutics to accessible to the patient has to be much shorter. And you cannot enjoy everything that you do for a disease like hemophilia, that it's almost a non-rare disease. So obviously then you look for diversity, you look for solid data, it's not life-threatening, you have all the solution available. And I'm not by any means trying to make hemophilia an easy disease, it's not, but it's different when you have a disease where your child is going to die in 2 years' time, there's nothing available. Let's get the drug on the on the clinic as soon as possible, prove that they're safe, and then let the parents be involved. And there's a lot of, at least for with the experience we have in France, there is a lot of push from the patients and family of patients to come forward and ask us, work on that disease, try to get it accelerated. It's so, yeah. So
Thanks,
that's the
Angela.
way we see it.
Thanks. And it's certainly the case that not all rare diseases are the same. It's a spectrum, and we see very different approaches for those very rare conditions where you kind of know the names of all the patients. And the patient group will have their phone numbers and know about their dog and when they're getting a new puppy and so on, compared to the haemophilia end of the spectrum, for example, cystic fibrosis, where there are, substantially more patients in most countries. I'm conscious that we have someone itching to talk on the floor. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Not so much itching, but just to take on a couple of points, because we're all talking about generating evidence and about decentralized trials is a really interesting way to include patients. And really, this means that we're taking technology to people. The reality is that not everybody has access to technology. And so while we talk about inclusion, maybe just something to think about. And the fact that when you look at the consent forms that patients have to review and sign, they're long, they're cumbersome, they're almost incomprehensible to most of us. And so how do we, provide information to patients in a way that's actually understandable to them, so that when we are generating evidence, we're doing so in a way that has patients' full consent. And the final thing I wanted to add really around this conversation was generating evidence is not just about collecting data. The FDA recently came out with guidance around the importance of how you define real world data and how it can so well be used for rare disease support, but most importantly, standards and ontologies that need to support that underlying infrastructure. So I think that sometimes we have a tendency to pop all our ingredients into a basket and think it's going to create something. And what I would say is we really have to think about what we're collecting, how we're collecting it, and making sure that when we're getting the information, it's done in a way that people understand why and how.
Thank you. We need the right ingredients for the right recipe, right? So we end up with the product that places like NICE actually are going to want to eat. Might have pushed that metaphor too far, I think.
And people might get, if anybody in the room does actually know me, my hashtag is not just patients. But it isn't just patients that don't understand. It's a general thing that, there are many other people within the industry who don't. So it needs to be quite universal, really. And if there was a move towards a universal language, then maybe that would be a huge step into making some progress.
Thanks, Carol. We've got any more questions or comments from the... In which case, I think I'll just give you all a chance to have a final word. And if you could change one thing, or you could get these good people to take one message away with them after this, in terms of, broadening. You can go first.
Okay, right.
What do you want them to know?
Oh, nothing. I've really enjoyed this discussion, and I think it kind of, those of us on the panel kind of represent a lot of the kind of facets to ensuring access of patients. And I think the key thing is to have, communication open between all of the stakeholders, because it is such a precious opportunity to have these treatments become accessible to the patients that need them. So I think that kind of collaboration, coming back to that word, between all of the parties and ensuring that, as one of the attendees pointed out, it's that kind of sort of thinking about everything very early and ensuring that you're collecting the right data at the right time from the right people.
Yeah, I just want to say that out of the experience we have at Genethon, the voice of the patients and the family of the patient is key to make changes, to help the rare and ultra rare community to get innovation in all aspects, and just not just the therapeutics that we said, but everything else that makes the life of these patients somehow easier. So strong voice, strong advocacy, I think is proven over and over again that for rare disease, it's a strong push to make changes.
I mean, both of my panel members have more or less said what I probably wanted to say. And I suppose for my sort of 3 or 4 words is that we all have a part to play here. We all have experience, knowledge, but we just need to bring it together in a cohesive way so that we can get these innovations out to patients and make the changes that we need to make.
Yes, and I echo. And yes, it's within the ultra rare, you haven't got that many, but you know, with the others, use the patients. The patients are there, they've got information to give, to help right from the very, very beginning. And I think from my perspective, that's where it all needs to start.
Thanks, Carol. Certainly a lot of agreement on the panel that the patients need to be at the centre of everything. So I'm really hoping as we go through the next couple of days of this conference that we don't just push the patients over to a silo and remember them in 1 or 2 meetings and 1 or 2 presentations, but bring them into the rest of the sessions as well. And then that point, I'm sure we'll be coming back to again and again and again, evidence, thinking creatively, but thinking very much as we've heard about getting the right kind of evidence for the right kinds of purpose. So understand what you need and how you can get it, and then creativity can abound. I think we have now caught up, Sheila, and you've got an extra couple of minutes for your presentation. So, and I thank the panel for being very gracious and giving some real insights, and thank you all for being awake and joining in.
Just while we're getting reorganized, if you need any coffee, water, please. And in the meantime, Sheila will be coming back up here to speak about NICE's 5-year strategy plan. What does it mean for rare disease patients? And we're really excited to hear about it. So welcome back.
Perfect. The joys of these virtual and in-person conferences. This is my first one, so if I make a complete mess of trying to run the slides and make sure that people outside can hear me, forgive me for this. What a great opportunity. I'm really excited to be here today because it's the first one since the COVID in person. So I'm hoping that it all goes really well. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the NICE 5-year strategy and an update on the methods review that recently NICE have undertaken. What does it all mean for rare diseases? Just a reminder about what NICE is all about. We're here to improve the health and well-being, putting science and evidence, we talked about evidence this morning, right at the heart of that decision-making, making sure that the decisions we've made are made with the right evidence and sound and transparent approaches. We've recently introduced a new strategic vision and a 5-year strategy, and we have a number of pillars that are associated with that. And I'm not going to talk to you about all of the pillars, but just to give you a bit of a flavour of what we're trying to achieve in the strategy. So the first pillar, the most important one for me, is that rapid, robust and responsive technology evaluation. Accelerating innovation, getting treatments to patients, getting care to patients is the priority for NICE. So we're really keen to ensure that the approaches and the methods that we take forward ensure that rapid and responsible evaluation. Dynamic and living guideline recommendations. Again, a lot of the work we do supports the health system in ensuring that treatments and services and infrastructures are in place to get those really good outcomes. So we're wanting to make sure that the guidelines we produce are active, they're agile, and they're able to respond to the changing landscape of the healthcare system. Effective guidance uptake. So, of course, it's no good putting guidance out there if people aren't going to adopt it, if patients aren't going to get access to all of those innovative treatments. We've got to be able to play our part to ensure that those guidance and all of the therapies that we put forward for the NHS to provide are actually given and adopted. So we're there to make sure that that happens. And then, of course, we want to be able to support the generation of evidence and give guidance on how research should be undertaken and how the science should be accelerated to ensure that the evidence is generated in that recipe for success that we've talked about this morning. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about that first pillar, because that's kind of, I'm hoping, what you're really, really interested in today. We really want to be at the forefront of evaluating existing and new and emerging technologies. We want to provide that independent clarity in terms of the assessments that we undertake to ensure that there is that improved access for patients. So there's a number of priorities that we've been focusing on for the first year of the strategy. We've established an Office of Digital Health and Technologies and a multi-agency service for AI producers, taking into account that the landscape is changing. We are getting more digital technologies. AI technologies are taking kind of a forefront in terms of the research and the development that is going on in those arenas. And there's potentially an opportunity for those to come together with therapies that are being, traditional therapies that are being put forward. So they become kind of a bit of a package of care and a package of support for those technologies. Exploring a contingent approval approach for medtech digital diagnostic products. So we're looking at the fact that you've seen that we've had a number of managed access arrangements in the therapeutic arena. Well, of course, medtech and diagnostics also need to think about how we can get those contingent approvals in place. Because, of course, we know in rare diseases, particularly, diagnosis is a real challenge. Patients are often bumped around the system and they don't really get the support they need. And it can be years sometimes before a diagnosis is made. So we want to see if there's opportunities for us to give more kind of managed access or contingent approval approaches in the medtech and diagnostic space to support that. We've recently introduced new methods and processes to align with trying to accelerate that access. And I'll talk you through some of the key changes in the next few slides. We're also working in partnership with the other international HTA agencies and the MHRA in terms of the ILAP. Again, I'll talk to you a little bit about that in the next few slides. And we're going to be developing an online life sciences hub. And that really is for stakeholders to be able to navigate through the system to understand what it is that NICE does, where they can find guidance, and what kind of support is available for developers in terms of what NICE can put forward. But there are huge challenges in this space for us. So we have been asked to evaluate all new products that come to us. And that, of course, creates a huge number of capacity challenges. We've got to get it right in terms of selecting the right technologies for the priorities that are appropriate and important for the NHS and for the healthcare ecosystem. We've got to get the right data to be able to make those assessments count. And we've got to be as responsive to new technologies that are coming through, particularly AI and digital, and we're trying to be able to put some frameworks around that. But of course, this creates huge opportunities as well. We've got the life sciences vision for the UK, where we're really trying to accelerate UK as a market leader in terms of research and innovation. And we want to be able to support that by ensuring that those new innovative technologies that come through are given access and given the right environment to flourish. We want to make the system and the healthcare ecosystem sustainable. We've got to be able to ensure that those therapies are available, that patients are getting the right outcomes, but in a sustainable manner. And we want to be able to accelerate the use of real-world evidence. People talk about it a lot, but what does it really mean? How do we create the right structure? And again, going back to that recipe for success. So just to move on a little bit, we've recently updated our methods and processes, and I wanted to just give you a bit of a flavour of what that's done for rare diseases and how that will translate. It's been 2 years or 2.5 years in the making. It's been a mammoth task, and it's taken us a lot of blood, sweat and tears, not just from people at NICE, but from wider stakeholders who have given us feedback, comments and advice on how we should proceed. And it'd be fair to say that some of you might argue that we haven't gone far enough. But trust me, those people who had to work on all of these methods will have said that it was a lot of blood, sweat and tears. But what we've shown for patients, there's prompt access to innovative health technologies, and there's an opportunity for patients and patient groups to contribute much more easily to this industry. We're hoping that the new methods are more responsive, they're more flexible, and they are much more predictable. But of course, it's really important to be able to apply flexibility in terms of the evidence generation, particularly where it's difficult, and in rare diseases and those complex conditions where that is a real challenge. And we want to be able to think about how we can provide further support for different types of evidence to be able to be presented, not that traditional randomized controlled trial evidence that we've been really used to seeing. So we're really trying to ensure that the system is much more open to new evidence. And of course, for the NHS, we've got to make sure that the support we give is fair and it's equitable, it's evidence-based access to innovations, and technologies that are clinically effective and value for money are given that sign off by us. So there are lots and lots of changes in the methods review, but I'm going to go through the ones that I think are key and important and have an impact for rare diseases. But if you do want some light reading, bedtime reading, please feel free to go to the website and read the manuals, which are lengthy and very detailed. So in terms of the standard technology approach, we've got two programs at NICE. We've got one that's the standard technologies appraisals program and the highly specialized technology program. The methods updates that I'm talking to you about today will be applicable in the standard technologies appraisals program. In that program, historically, we used to have what's called an end of life criteria, and that was applied to those technologies where there was an acceleration to the end of life, where you got a higher ISA. What we've done is replace the end of life criteria with severity of disease. So we want to be able to give committees the flexibility to apply a modifier that says this disease or this condition is extremely severe, taking into account the evidence that's presented around that. And it means that the committee can provide and apply an additional weight, acknowledging that that condition is so severe that there are impacts on quality of life for patients. And I think it's really important that those rare diseases that go through that program will have the ability to demonstrate that severity to committees and for that modifier to be applied. Then, of course, health inequalities. We talk quite a lot about health inequalities in rare diseases, and we're really conscious that it's a really important priority. And we need to make sure that that is taken account of by committees about those health inequalities that are created for rare disease patients and severe disease patients. But we've got to be able to get some other research undertaken to understand how we can ensure that those health inequalities are appropriately considered by committees. And then, of course, discounting. A lot of people talk about why can't we change our discounting rates? We've made a case for changing it to a lower discounting rate. However, there are wider implications of adopting that in the wider health ecosystem. And much as we would like to be able to adopt it, we've got to take into account the priorities for the NHS, the challenges that the DH have, the Department of Health and Social Care have in terms of the current financial landscape and the challenges that we're dealing with. So we've retained the current approach to the discounting rate at 3.5%. The other things that you're probably interested in terms of the rare disease is the kind of the uncertainty piece. Of course, we know there's a lot of uncertainty in rare diseases, evidence, and then commercial and managed access. So one of the things that we're really cognizant of is that in rare diseases, the uncertainties are often great based on all the challenges that we've talked about this morning. So again, we've got the ability for NICE and the committees to be able to apply flexibility and more understanding to be accepting that some uncertainties in those rare diseases will never be resolved, or actually they might be resolved 30 years down the line and we can't wait that long. So what do we need to do to be able to manage that, to quantify it and understand it? So committees can apply those flexibilities. Then, of course, as I've talked about earlier, the opportunity to consider different types of evidence. So patient-generated evidence, surveys, expert elicitation, vignettes, other ways of capturing that story, building that puzzle, making it much more of a complete puzzle. The committee will have the ability to accept and acknowledge that information and put it together to think, actually, those uncertainties that we thought were there in the trial evidence actually have been bridged by other sorts of evidence that can be looked at. Commercial and managed access, a lot of people want their technologies to go into managed access. So what we've been able to do now is provide much more clarity about the managed access process, the criteria under which you can enter into a managed access or be considered for one, and the commercial flexibilities that NHS England will then offer companies to be able to engage in those conversations. And hopefully that means that all stakeholders who participate in appraisals are able to kind of see the approaches that need to be taken, the things that they need to think about when they're presenting evidence to us for a managed access agreement. The next thing I wanted to talk to you a little bit about is we've done a huge amount of work on the highly specialised technology topic selection criteria, which has been, it'd be fair to say, and Josie will know, under a huge amount of criticism, scrutiny, and whatever else you want to call it for many, many years. Josie was probably tasked with it when she first joined, but I was the... I was then tasked when I picked up the role to try and deal with it. She basically passed the baton on and then left me to it. But what we've been trying to do with that programme is to provide more clarity, predictability, and a little bit more structure around why we've got the criteria and what the criteria really means. And in that exercise, what we discovered is what we were missing is that narrative. Why does the HST programme exist? What are we trying to achieve from it? And what do we need to do? So we've developed a bit more of a structure and clarity around the vision. And it really is to explain that the highly specialised technology programme is that exceptional programme. It's a programme that looks at very rare diseases where there are very, very small patient numbers, where there is a huge unmet need, particularly in most of those very rare diseases, there are no treatments available. So we really want to accelerate those treatments in those areas. And it's likely that those patients will have huge additional benefits if these treatments are made available to them. We're acknowledging in that HST programme that in those very rare diseases, generating evidence in that kind of constructed manner with a complete picture is much, much more challenging. And therefore, that the kind of research efforts and the resource that needs to be expended is much, much greater. So in terms of the aims that we're trying to achieve here, we want to encourage research. We want to encourage innovation in those very rare diseases so that that evidence that is generated is as robust as it can be for NICE to be able to make those decisions. We want to make sure that the programme secures that fairer and more equitable access for those very small populations with really rare diseases. But we also have to accept that if we were to put those very rare diseases through our standard approach, we would probably not be able to give positive recommendations. So we've got to have a programme like this to facilitate for those really, really rare conditions that would really struggle. However, we've got to acknowledge the role that we play within the wider health ecosystem. Therefore, people will feel sometimes aggrieved that we've had to kind of put a kind of structure and limit on the number of topics that we would see in the HST programme. Because for every time we choose to route a topic through the HST programme and a positive recommendation is made in the NHS, we have to be aware and cognizant of that wider healthcare that we're displacing in the wider healthcare system. NICE isn't just dealing with those highly specialised technologies. NICE is supporting the wider health ecosystem. So whilst it's really, really important, and you won't find anyone more passionate than me in NICE about rare diseases, we've got to be aware that we've also got a wider health kind of need that we've got to be supporting. So we've tried to kind of create the criteria in order to take account of all of the exceptional situations that we have in those very rare diseases, but be really careful that we've got a role in that wider healthcare system. So it's really trying to create a real balance. So This is the criteria that we've landed on. I'm hoping that most of you have seen it, but I will talk you through it really, really quickly. The condition is very rare, so it's got to be defined by 1 in 50,000 as a starting entry point into the criteria. But when you get to the next set of criteria, it's got to be no more than 300 people that would be eligible for their technology in its license indication, and no more than 500 people across all its indications. The very rare disease for which the technology is indicated significantly shortens life or impairs its quality. Well, we know this. In those really rare diseases, those complex comorbidities make a particular very rare disease unique. You will never find another Alström syndrome patient in a prevalent condition. You will never find another MPS 3 patient in another type. The complexities of those comorbidities are so unique, you won't find it anywhere else. And then, of course, the unmet need. There is no satisfactory treatment that's available for those patients, or what there is available is not as good as this new treatment could be. So we're looking to try and ensure that we're choosing the right treatments that go through these programs. There is an important thing to note: the ability for NICE to apply flexibility and judgment in these criteria where it's appropriate to do so. But the case has to be really, really strong. And everyone's going to ask me, well, what do you mean? We don't know that yet until those cases start to present to us and we can start to share with the world, these are the exceptions we made and these are why we made them. So whilst people want us to have consistent, predictable outcomes in this, it's not an algorithm. We're not going to be able to put these criteria and the associated numbers and evidence through and suddenly put it through a computer or a cranking machine and come up with an answer that will be the same every time. Because as we all know, these really rare diseases are complex, have different attributes, and we've got to take them all into account and balance out the decision as and when we're making them. So the other thing to note is we haven't answered every question in the methods review and the process review. There's loads of things that we could do differently. There's loads of things that we could do better. And instead of doing what we've done this time is gone for a one big bang of a methods review, we've decided to update the methods and processes on a modular fashion. So as new evidence becomes available about things that we should be doing differently or better, we want to be an organisation that's much more agile and responding to those things in a more modular fashion. We're going to ensure that we're combining a much more cohesive, improved horizon scanning functions so we can be more aware of those new things that are coming through, where methods might need to be adapted, and trying to capture those innovations so that there's continued rapid access as quickly as possible. We've introduced a new NICE Listens program, which will provide us an opportunity to link to the public insight and societal values. And we're going to ensure that our program of rolling improvements ensure that we take into account the new digital and AI technologies that are coming on board. So what's all this mean for rare diseases? God, it seems like we've done so much stuff, but what does it really mean for rare diseases? This is my interpretation. Other people may have different interpretation, but we feel like we've really come a long way in terms of that broad package for rare diseases. Josie will know rare diseases wasn't even a thing until she and I kind of introduced it to NICE. And I think that it's taken a lot of time that's invested in terms of educating the organisation about all of this. So we think that it'll improve earlier access to valuable and innovative treatments in the rare disease arena. It's more equitable access for patients with severe and rare diseases. The revised criteria will provide more clarity and ensure that there are more appropriate routing decisions around what goes into the HST programme. There's the ability to embrace a fuller evidence base and wider data sources, which I think is really welcome because the rare disease community have a plethora of data, and a lot of the time organisations like NICE and the FDA and others are going, well, yeah, it's all very well, but it's not done in a structured way. People are becoming much more open to that. The ability to provide more clarity, more predictability and transparency in how we develop our guidance, what happens and when, and it means that stakeholders will be able to follow the process in a much more structured way. And because we're committing to that continuous improvement, if new evidence becomes available that we should be doing something differently, we'll be much more agile and more adapting to be able to accommodate for that. Just a couple of things to pick up, given that we have talked a little bit about digital and AI, I just wanted to kind of really give you a bit of a flavour of the things that we're doing in that space. So the MedTech program, those of you that are aware, we don't just evaluate therapies, we do look at MedTech products. So we do have a program that looks at those, and we try and select the right medical technologies to determine whether or not it's appropriate for the NHS to commission those. We're really looking at trying to get faster uptake in that space. And as I said earlier, we're looking to try and see if we can get some kind of contingent approval where real world data is collected to see whether that MedTech is working for patients. We've also got the diagnostic assessment program, which evaluates technologies for diagnostics. And we're looking to see whether or not we can get contingent approvals in that arena too. And the reason that I'm flagging this is because a lot of rare disease therapies come with MedTech now, come with diagnostics associated with them. So we want to be able to have the right approaches in place to be able to look at them together. And in terms of digital health, we're really trying to provide a real structure on how we evaluate digital health technologies. We've put together some best practice guidance around what the universal quality standard should be around in digital health and what evaluation methods should be undertaken. And we have already assessed 50 technologies featuring digital health components. So we are learning along the way. We're becoming much more aware of what we need to do to make that work. We've developed a new multi-agency advice service for AI. So if there are any companies here who are working in kind of AI or data-driven technologies, please feel free to access this advice service. It provides support, information, advice, and is a combination of the MHRA, the Care Quality Commission, and the NIHR, which is the Research Health Authority. We will be launching a web page in spring 2022, but it's really, if you have got technologies that you want to get advice on and support on, please feel free to access this service. And just in terms of how we work with innovators, contacting us through the Life Sciences webpage will put you in touch with the right teams that will then start to understand your routes to market, help you convene conversations with the appropriate stakeholders, start thinking about all the different challenges you might have and the evidence base you need to create. We'll put together a really good comprehensive package of advice for you, also go through potential commercial options and start to help you think about the models and the structures of the evidence base that you need to put forward to the different stages of the pathway. And a number of other things. We're also exploring the innovative devices access pathway. So working again with the MHRA and Health Technology Wales and the Scottish Health Technologies Group, developing a new pre-market pathway for medical devices. So that again, we're accelerating medical devices into the health system as quickly as possible, ensuring that they are able to meet the clinical and critical unmet needs in the arena for the health system, ensuring that the most innovative technologies will be safe, but with conditional access while we're collecting real world data and providing that access support in the post-marketing surveillance arena. And then just in terms of the Life Sciences Hub, we're starting to develop web pages that will navigate through with all the support services that we can offer companies and other stakeholders in that life sciences space around different ways to engage with NICE, a little bit about our programs, how to kind of engage in the different support services we offer. And then in terms of making a positive impact, we hope we're starting to make lots of positive impact, particularly in the rare disease arena. We have made 95% of completed technology appraisals guidance positive. All of our highly specialised ones have been positive so far. We've helped to shape the evidence collection plans for 8 groundbreaking AI technologies being trialled in the NHS so far. We've recommended £2.8 million treatment, the first most expensive treatment for metachromic leukodystrophy. And you've probably seen that. And that for me was a brilliant, massive achievement for the HST programme. Introduction of biosimilars have been led to the availability of further treatment options for 25,000 people. And the Med Technologies guidance has recommended plus sutures for the first affordable stitches and antibacterial protection. So loads of things that we've been doing, and we hope that this will be updated and made more positive as the time goes on, particularly as I start to see more and more rare disease technologies coming through that. I want that list to be much, much longer and much more comprehensive. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you so much. Questions?
Thanks. Although to be fair, this is my second chance this morning. These are rare diseases indeed you're talking about. 1 in 50,000. I mean, I don't have all the facts and figures at my disposal for every disease, but I'll be talking briefly about immune thrombocytopenic purpura, for example, later on this morning. That is something like 5 per 100,000. It's still deemed to be pretty rare. So it's quite a corner we're talking about here. The other thing, I couldn't get my head around the figures in that it's 1 in 50,000, but it's 300 patients. That would give me 1,000 patients if we think there's 50 million people in England, but.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. So the reason we started with 1 in 50,000 was it was an entry point into the HST criteria. However, going back to the vision and the principles, we're wanting it to be supportive of those very, very rare conditions, really small populations. Historically, the highly specialized program has seen, I'm going to say, starting at sort of a population of 10 patients, going right up to about 300, 350 patients. It's kind of been a range. It hasn't really gone beyond that. And if I kind of reflect back on some of the rationale for doing that, it was to make sure that, one, we really accelerated support for those really rare conditions where the evidence generation is really challenging. Companies have to invest a huge amount of resource into bringing those technologies to market. And if they didn't, those very rare diseases would never get supported. But also going back to that balance. So we've got to balance out for the wider system. So the 1 in 50 is just that kind of entry point, but we do need to bring it down to that much lower figure. And that's where we've landed there.
I promise I won't grill you too much, but I do have a question, and it won't surprise you. So thinking about this, and that's great, and yep, fantastic. I'm glad that you're there with your passion and you're carrying on the work with rare diseases. What I do worry a little bit about is how success is going to be measured by the wider organization at NICE, how they're going to, and by success for rare diseases, I mean looking beyond HST and not thinking HST has solved the whole problem. And that I'm a little triggered by the modular approach in that, because if you're looking at things bit by bit, how do you take stock on the interaction between those different aspects and that impact on rare diseases, especially if you've not got really clear measures of what success would look like? So it's not that nice a question, but it's okay.
No, and it's a really important one. So one of the things that I'm hoping to put forward in my kind of rare disease strategic advisor role for NICE is to start thinking about mapping the number of technologies that get routed to HST, the number of rare disease technologies that go into the standard appraisals program, and the number that then get positive recommendations. But I think what's really important for us to think about is that's not the only thing that NICE does. So the other thing that I want to start to implement is start thinking about how can we put guidelines in to NICE around rare diseases, because we've got lots of technologies that have already been approved for rare diseases that we need to put a framework around. We need to put in things like quality standards. We need to do some stuff that's wider than just the therapies to ensure that the rare disease as a whole is responded to by the organisation. And that's some of the things that we're hoping to do in terms of the actions that we'll put forward in response to the rare disease framework. So you're absolutely right, Josie. It shouldn't just be around HST. And I think it's really important that people remember it's not just HST that NICE does in rare diseases. It can approve technologies through the standard approach for rare diseases, but I want to be able to actually give more to the other parts of the NICE organisation to accelerate response to rare diseases.
Great, thank you on that. I think we're at time, so I'm sure, sorry, Sheila, you'll be out enjoying some coffee later on, and hopefully you can take some more questions then. That was really, really interesting. Thank you so much. A round of applause for Sheila. So I'd like to invite the next panel up. I believe that Keith is not able to join, correct? And Paul. So there are two people standing. No. Elisabetta, please come and join us on the stage. Alexander Natz. Is Alexander Natz in the audience?
He's supposed to be joining.
Online, okay. And Dan, I'm going to invite you to join. I almost feel like we should call Sheila back. or you. Yes. What are you talking about? We're talking about the overview of the current European market landscape for orphan drugs. Would anybody else like to join the panel? This is a very, very collaborative group. No, it's fine. It's so anybody who's not speaking who really is interested in the market landscape, and if not, then make sure you participate through the Q&A. Okay. I hope it wasn't anything you said. Okay, we have one more joining online. So we're just going to wait a minute for the person online to join. Just let us know. Is our online person set up yet?
Yeah, he's not in.
He's not in yet. Okay, well, why don't we maybe start with introductions? And thank you so much again for being here today. I think I've already introduced myself. So I'm Fumita Guadru-Sridhar. I'm going to be your moderator today for this panel anyway. And I'm the founder and CEO of Pulse InfoFrame. In my introduction previously, I didn't tell you what we do. So I am the CEO and founder of a platform, a health technology platform company that creates evidence and generates evidence in both rare disease and oncology primarily, looking at collecting data that from the beginning, which is really the preclinical data, natural history, trial data that we support, and ultimately collecting the right types of data that can be utilized for pricing reimbursement as well as for other regulatory purposes. The platform is built in a structured way with OMOP, which is a regulatory standard that the FDA and EMA recognize. And so that's essentially what we do. The company was founded a decade ago, and we have a global footprint with a really big interest in rare disease. So really pleased to be here. Elisabetta, please, over to you.
Good morning. Is it working? Yes. Good. Okay. Good morning. I am Elisabetta Zanon. I work as the Director of EU Public Affairs and Advocacy at the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine. The Alliance for Regenerative Medicine is an international advocacy organization dedicated to realizing the promise of gene, cell, and tissue-based therapies. As the global voice for the sector, we represent the interest of over 400 members across 25 countries. 85 of our members are based in Europe. Our members include large and small companies, academic research organizations, major medical centers, and patient groups. And our work is dedicated to ensuring that there is a fit for purpose and clear regulatory framework, enabling innovative payment models, addressing manufacturing barriers, and educating policymakers and stakeholders using data and analysis.
Thank you so much. Dan, would you like to introduce yourself, maybe with two hats?
Yep, so my name is Dan Louis. I work with Fumita. I'm head of business development and patient advocacy at Pulse. So I work closely with all our industry and advocacy partners who utilize our platform. I'm also one of the co-founders of a rare disease charity called the CATS Foundation, and that's for Tay-Sachs disease. We've been able to advance therapies, treatments, and networks across the globe for a rare disease that had none of that established at the time 10 years ago. It's great to be here today.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you for agreeing to take a chair. And is anybody online with us yet? Is Alexander there? Not yet? Okay, well, we'll get cracking and hopefully he'll join. And I'm going to open this up to the audience a fair bit because you'll probably get tired of listening to my voice continuously. So Elizabeth, I want to ask you a question about the regulations and how they're changing in Europe. So in particular, you talked about what you're doing, which I think is really impressive. How do you see the regulations either supporting or potentially creating challenges for what your mission is as an organization?
Yes, thank you very much for this question, which I have to say is really very, very timely because at EU level, we have now a revision of the pharmaceutical legislation. The pharmaceutical legislation in Europe dates of around 20 years ago. So it's really time to look at this regulatory framework and to see if it is still fit for purpose in terms of all the innovation that we have seen happening during these years. The regulatory framework that we have at the moment has been supportive of the development of advanced therapies. I'm referring in particular to the ATMP's regulation, but also the Orphan Medicinal Products Regulation, which has allowed to bring an increasing number of authorized products for rare diseases to market. So to meet the number of unmet medical needs for the rare disease community. But I have to say that this is really just the beginning. We have today around 200 products being authorized for rare diseases. This is nothing if we consider the number of rare diseases. And also they cover only 5% of the existing rare diseases. So basically we have 95% of rare diseases which are not covered at all. And also for the 5% of diseases which are covered, we have to say that what we have as therapies, they are not transformational. They look mainly at dealing with the symptoms, trying to manage or minimize the symptoms, but not at cure the disease itself. So there is a need for innovation very much. There is a need for innovation which is transformational, which can allow to deal with the root causes of the disease rather than symptoms. And cell and gene therapies, of course, they offer huge opportunities in this space to meet unmet medical needs, but we need the regulatory framework to be supportive. We hope that with the revision of the European legislation, the particular needs of our sector will be taken into account. The Alliance for Regenerative Medicine is, of course, very, very much engaged with EU decision makers in bringing forward key messages from the sector. And I can elaborate more later if you want on which sort of changes we are advocating for.
Okay, thank you. Dan, maybe if we can just add to what Elisabetta just talked about, and that is around some of your experience with a regulatory framework, whether there was one or wasn't one, as you embarked on your journey with Tay-Sachs, and maybe some lessons learned and that you could share.
So one of the big lessons that we learned was that we had lots of, we've been able to bring in lots of industry into our rare disease, which 10 years ago, there was nothing really happening. Now we've got a couple of gene therapy programs, drug repurposing, some molecule work with big and small pharma. But really, these guys were working independently and working really in silos, in many ways, kind of developing endpoints, their clinical trial design, how they were collecting data and what data. And so what we've been trying to do is bring them all together so we have one centralized view, because our big issue, realistically, like any kind of rare disease, is getting therapies approved. Things like endpoint selection, is it the most appropriate? Is the way the trial was designed, placebo control, not placebo control.